So this is a time project, and I'm sorry that I didn't make a video about this when it's relevant, when it was relevant. Well, I guess it's always relevant, but like, it's after the major conflict is kind of over, and we're just basically going back to the status quo, which is still incredibly damaging, but, you know, that's just kind of how this works. So I'm pretty sure most of you are familiar with the nation of Israel in the Middle East, and how the US is a very strong supporter of Israel, and they give Israel unconditional support, and they never punish or give Israel any consequences for any of their war crimes. And I'm just going to say that because that's what happens. We give $3.8 billion of aid to Israel each year, and anytime a major conflict happens, we give even more money in defense spend towards like the Israel military. So yeah, how is it that we get to this place where the US is such a strong supporter of Israel? Why is that the case? Well, before we answer that question, I'm going to basically say that anything you hear on the news media about Israel and Palestine is basically a load of bullshit. They say that it's a complicated conflict when it really isn't. It's not complicated at all. Israel is an ethno-nationalist terrorist organization that wants to basically want to remove Palestine. They just want to basically remove or get rid of any remnants of Palestine, and they're willing to do that by any means necessary, even if that means bombing them, because like we've seen Gaza gets bombed like consistently because of like they think, and a lot of the excuse is that they think that Hamas is there, and even that's just an incredibly bad excuse. Like, if you remember, like, Israel bombs fucking refugee camps, they bomb hospitals, and again, if you remember, they bombed a report, like a journalist office in in the middle of May, because they said that Hamas was there, and they gave everyone 1 hour to leave. Imagine that. 1 hour to leave because they thought Hamas was there with no evidence. Okay? Imagine that. Imagine you're in a hotel and imagine you're in like a vacation at a hotel, and then you get a message saying that in 1 hour the entire place is going to get bombed and you have to leave. And then you have to get you have to leave and get away from like the blast range. Imagine that. All because they suspected Hamas was there on little to no evidence. And that's always their go-to excuse. Hamas. That's why we need to bomb Palestine all the time, because Hamas is there. Well, I can tell you, Hamas is basically like the North Korea of Israel, where it's a scapegoat. It has literally like almost next to no power, and it can't really do anything, versus Israel, the Israel government, the Israel Defense Force, that's very powerful, very well funded. They have a bunch of military equipment, and they can easily do a lot of damage to Palestine. Like, this is such a one-sided conflict. Like, Israel, like the amount of deaths that happen in Israel is not even close. It pales in comparison to the amount of deaths that happen in Palestine. And they bomb the Gaza Strip, and it consistently remains damaged. They bulldoze Palestinian homes. They made it illegal for Palestinians to have or wave their flag or show their flag. This is what Israel is. That's what they are. It's a terrorist organization. And yeah, and even then, like with Hamas, like when Israel's literally trying to basically ethnically cleanse Palestinians and get rid of them by any means necessary, can you really blame Palestine for having their own defense force because if Israel is so destructive? Because I really can't. Okay, and many Israelite citizens, like you probably seen some interviews where they say what they think about the conflict. They're fucking fascists. They sound like fascists. They are fascists because they literally say that Palestinians need to leave. Like, they need to go away, and that they're willing, and that they're terrorizing them, and they need to be taken care of or got rid of, again, by any means necessary. And that's what we're dealing with here. I mean, the Biden administration blocked a UN call for a ceasefire 5 times. And then during the conflict, they sent they sent another $1 million, hundreds of millions of dollars in defense and for arms spending in Israel just to help them all the time. All the time we side with Israel. This is what happens. It's what the Biden administration did, because they have to always remain in critical support of Israel. But why do we support Israel? What is it in it for us? People say that some people, insane fucking Nazis, will say that America the US is an Israel puppet, is a puppet of Israel. But that's not the case at all. It's actually the reverse. Israel is a puppet of the US. And why, again, that gets to the major question: why does the US support Israel so much? Why? But there's two reasons. One, because it gives us influence over that area. It's a strong ally in the Middle East. It's a well-funded ally, and it gives us more influence in that area in the Middle East. And two, and this is probably the bigger reason, there are a bunch of insane fucking religious zealots in government, and they really influence the way that our government functions. Mainly a bunch of fundamentalist Christians. So when they're funding Israel, what they think that they are funding the second coming of Christ. The fact that Israel is an ethno-nationalist terrorist organization that wants to ethnically cleanse Palestine out of existence is completely irrelevant to them. As long as they can trick themselves that Jesus Christ is going to come back, they don't care how many Palestinians die along the way. They want to blindly follow what religion, what Christianity has told them. And that's why we support Israel. It's basically because religion is really the biggest terror force in the world, and that's why we support Israel so much. In this way, you could argue that Donald Trump was the worst president in modern US history, because not only was he the most insane of the insane religious zealots, or at least one of the most insane, but he was also the most pro-Israel president we have ever had, and he even recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And the Israelite government, they loved Donald Trump. They loved him so much. They wanted him to win back another term. They loved him. But either way, this conflict is going to go on, and it's going to continue, and it's going to get worse. Benjamin Netanyahu, I believe that's how it's pronounced, is probably going to lose his position as Israel's prime minister, which would be a good thing if the guy who was replacing him wasn't even worse, even further to the right, and doesn't think that Palestine has a right to exist at all. Naftali Bennett is his name, and he's insane, and he is about 90, and it's a 90% possibility, pretty much almost guaranteed at this point, that he is going to be the new prime minister of Israel. And it's going to be bad. So we can't really do anything, because again, the insane fucking religious people have a lot of power in government. So there's not really much we can do except protest. So do that. Anyway, that's basically my take on Israel. And that's all I really have to say about this situation. So this is the Time Project, signing out.